One of the big outstanding questions is, do you get some sort of unity of purpose in the broader opposition? If you do that, the ANC is gone.
New polling from the Social Research Foundation suggests that the ANC might be clinging on by its fingernails to that 50% majority that it will need in the next elections in 2024. Joining me to discuss is the head of the SRF, Frans Cronje, who was once with us at the CRA. Frans, very good to have you back.
David, very nice to see you too.
And as our viewers can see, you are joining us from a hotel lobby in Washington, D.C. So thanks very much for squeezing us in.
Yeah, no, it's a bit informal today, but I think the information is what matters.
Right, well, let's jump into it. You've conducted some polling. Could you tell us a little bit about the methodology and some of the results that you found?
Yeah, sample of just over 3,000 people. They're all registered voters, overall margin of error under 2%. And what it suggests is, were an election to have been held in July, the ANC amongst likely voters at a turnout level approximating that of 2019 would come in just on about, it's almost, that actually is the number, 50% of the vote. So that's a bit higher than some of the numbers that have been circulating in the South African media over the past 2 weeks. I don't think there's a great conflict there between polls. I think some of the earlier data done by other groups was measuring different things. Popular support, favorability wasn't filtered for registered voters, wasn't filtered for likely turnout or likely voters. And in fact, where I've done that roughly with some of the other data, the figures are in fact not that far apart. And the point then is that the confidence with which some analysts project that the ANC is dead and buried is perhaps overdone. ANC potentially has the scope to cling to another national majority for a further election cycle.
And why is it important that you polled registered voters, Frans? They're obviously more likely to actually cast their votes as opposed to just polling general public sentiment and attitudes towards a party, because that would include non-voters.
It makes an enormous difference. I mean, if you're not registered to vote, it's very difficult, firstly, to register you. You can make some inferences about your interest in participating in elections and the like. You might often be so disillusioned or so fed up that to pull you into the formal voting system, make you vote, is very expensive to do, very difficult for parties with limited resources to do. So it's important to distinguish, firstly, between sentiment towards parties and then registered voter sentiment towards those same parties. And then beyond that, to determine from registered voters which ones are likely to vote and which are not, and then to run your numbers a further time. And when you do that, you see some quite important differences, which now in the South African case, where its ruling party might lose an election by a couple of points here or win by a couple of points, these distinctions become very important in understanding what's likely to happen next.
All right, Frans, so that's the ANC. What about the opposition? You've got the DA on about 25%. That's across all registered voters, but then also on the 66 and the 56% turnout scenarios. Yeah. EFF hovering around 11, 12%.
Yeah, the DA figure comes in at about 25, regardless of what you do with the numbers. So that would suggest somewhat of a recovery in that party. The EFF remains trapped at about 11, 12, which has been its historical ceiling. It's a ceiling that corresponds to the market for radical populism in South Africa. And the newcomers, enormous potential, did so very well in Soweto in their first times out. They've replicated that at some by-elections. ASA, we've got them at the moment at about 5 or 6 in a national election.
All right, well, this throws open some pretty interesting scenarios, Frans. We've been talking a lot about the potential for coalition politics to be what will characterize the future of South African politics. If the ANC hangs on by its fingernails, that could delay that long-awaited political realignment, or would it?
Yeah, look, it depends what it's hanging on to. It might hang on to a national majority. It might. If you delve a lot deeper into a lot of South Africa's political data now, what you do see is that if opposition parties were able to project a broadly united front in focusing on basic delivery questions of job, safety, service delivery, they would beat the ANC pretty easily, I think. So one of the big outstanding questions is, do you get some sort of unity of purpose in the broader opposition? If you do that, the ANC is gone. If only urban people voted, the ANC would get about 30% in the next election. It's lost the urban centres. Gauteng is gone for it. Gauteng is going to be join the Western Cape as a bastion of opposition support. And therefore, even if the ANC does hold its national majority, the first thing South African sort of observers or businesses need to start thinking about, or one thing, is that the people who govern the economic centres and the parties are going to be very different to the people who govern the rural heartlands. And that's likely to remain the case for perhaps a couple of election cycles still to come.
And what about in the key battleground of KwaZulu-Natal, Frans? I think, as you're suggesting in your analysis, there's become this bifurcation of the electorate that around, I guess, an urban-rural divide, and the ANC kind of retreating into the rural areas. The KZN has always been a very contentious area, yeah.
Fascinating. Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa's most popular politician, his favourability score amongst registered voters sitting at around 50, except in Natal, David, where Jacob Zuma is far and away, well over 50, the most popular political leader. ANC's polling at 45 in Natal at the moment. What that means to me is if they do not have Jacob Zuma prominently in their campaign, they risk losing that province as well, which later splits the ANC entirely. The consequences are actually very, very severe for the ANC itself. However, having Zuma prominently in the campaign will depress ANC support in the urban centres among the middle classes even faster. So that is front of mind for ANC strategists. It's going to be a major challenge for them. Opposition leaders on the whole poll in the mid-20s, 23, 24, 25, in terms of favourability, how they're regarded by voters. On the whole, the most popular of the group is actually Mmusi Maimane. He's amongst likely voters in a 2019 turnout scenario. Mmusi is actually the only opposition figure that breaks out of the 20s and gets to a favourability score of just on 30%.
I think that raises an interesting prospect for the ANC, because I think what Mr. Ramaphosa has done so well is sort of distance himself from some of the egregious governance problems that characterized the ANC under the Zuma administration. That's been a big part of his public relations, saying it's a new dawn and what have you. But then on the other hand, if you bring in Zuma in order to get the votes, then that kind of collapses that theory. That seems to be a paradox to me.
It does, but that's the reality, and what that reality actually says is that the ANC is split in many ways, but there's an urban-rural split. All of that's the case, but there's another split which is Natal and the rest of the ANC, and that's an almost insurmountable political chasm in the country now, and how the ANC navigates it, very, very difficult for them to do. I don't actually think it can be done without it causing severe damage on one side of that political party or the other. The consequence of which is that one of the splits to start looking for in future South African politics is the split around the ANC in Natal itself, and what that says for the future of South Africa's ruling party.
Very notable that after the Nasrec conference, there was not a single Zulu speaker in the top 6 of the ANC. Yeah. And also recently, the provincial ANC elected somebody who was not necessarily totally on board with Mr. Ramaphosa's agenda.
Yeah. Another thing that was tested, people think it's not worth testing because it can't be, but it is support for, there's a big debate about the Western Cape, or growing debate, should the Western Cape go it alone? We asked the same questions on Natal, and in fact, there's a surprising degree of support for the idea under the right circumstances Natal going it alone too. So I mean, we long said when I was still a direct colleague of yours, we used to talk about this to clients, that a lot of what South Africa's next election, 2024, is a test of the decision of union in 110 years ago. And I think that what we see in this political data and what we see in the Natal data is exactly that. A test of whether it is actually possible to run South Africa as a unitary state out of the centre in Pretoria. If its governing officials cannot do that well, or a future opposition coalition cannot do that well, what that begins to trigger is what we called all those years back. This is analyses that run back a good 10 or 15 years, the breakup of South Africa, either in a de facto basis, which is the more likely outcome, it's just organic, or in a de jure sort of style breakup, which is very much less likely. But the data on Natal, how that splits the ANC between the Ramaphosa and the Zuma camps, how very different ANC opinion in Natal is to ANC national opinion on political questions, that data is raising again the prospects of this kind of de facto fracturing of the country that was brought about by union. And if you ask me, one of the things to anticipate in the future South Africa is how do you deal with that fracturing as it plays out ever more prominently.
Let's hand over to you now, our audience. Do you think that the ANC will manage to hang on in 2024? Leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. Also, if you enjoyed this analysis, please do hit that subscribe button and like this video as well. That will ensure that you get fed with all of our great content. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.